Adrian, great to have you with us today. Can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your research?
Yes, my name is Adrian Butterworth. I am a demonstrator and point 4 lecturer at Bournemouth University, and as part of the desire to progress and move forwards, I've undertaken quite a number of qualifications over the years, but at the moment I'm working towards a doctorate and a Doctor of Education, and my title for the work that I'm putting forward for that is: to what extent is the University Television Studio an inclusive pedagogic space?
Okay. I have a fairly good understanding of what that title means. Can you elaborate?
Well, and yes, every time I say this, I get uncomfortable with the fact that the word pedagogy is in the title, because that's, one of the things that you're encouraged to do with research is to make it instantly sort of accessible and understandable. And pedagogy is one of those words that sort of is part of technical jargon that in a way is used to obscure how simple sometimes things are. And it just means learning in the studio. So it's just, is it an inclusive learning space would actually be a more reasonable title. But I suppose the same as everyone else, I feel that pressure to put a word in that makes it sound
intellectual.
Yeah. Thank you for finishing my sentence. But yes, that's exactly. No, I think that's exactly right. So yes, to what extent is the University Television Studio an inclusive learning space? So maybe we'll change it to that.
I think you should, actually.
It's interesting having this conversation because, of course, you do question things as you're saying them. In fact, I did a postgraduate certificate in education a few years back, which I think you've done as well, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
The same time, in fact.
Yes.
But my point being that actually, were you in that presentation group? You may have even been in the presentation group when we did a presentation on learning through teaching.
Yeah.
No, you weren't. You were in a different group, weren't you?
Were we? I don't know.
I can't remember what you did
Carry
for your
on.
presentation. But yes, it was a group of 4 of us, and we did it on the fact that when you are teaching, when you're putting something you understand into a framework to communicate it to other people for them to understand it, that is at the point which you question your how well it all fits together, and tend to improve the whole way that you're thinking about it, the theoretical framework that you're applying to those sets of ideas. So what I'm saying is this is very useful. Thank you.
Oh, I see. Like speaking out loud about it is going to help you to.
Yeah, and putting it into a framework for somebody else to understand. Each time you do that, you refine the framework, I think, personally. When you're sat down reading or writing and engaging with the work on your own, you're not thinking about it from someone else's perspective and how easy that is to understand. And you don't refine the framework in that way. So anyway, yes, to what extent is the University Television Studio an inclusive learning space? Is the question.
When you're writing then, do you think you're not at all thinking about your audience reading it as you're writing it?
Yes, you are, but I think that's different to speaking out loud to somebody. I mean, yeah. I've not critiqued in the same way having the word pedagogy in the title as I have when I've said it, and a couple of times recently I've said it out loud and have substituted the word learning for pedagogy, and as soon as I said it to you just then, did the same thing. So I think that makes sense. It makes a simpler, more easy to understand title. And actually I've forgotten there is a second half to the title, which is a Bourdieusian approach, which points to the theoretical framework through which the research is being conducted, which is to use a lot of the sort of ideas Pierre Bourdieu had about education and society.
So that sort of subtitle could perhaps appease the more academic audience that you're hoping to reach, and the main title is a bit more inclusive and allows people to...
Yeah, well, I think you've just actually answered the question of whether I should change it or not, because it's not about... Even an academic audience does not want to be needlessly encumbered by difficult words, even a word that's not particularly difficult like pedagogy. But the important thing is that we've got inclusion in the title, and I'm using a word that excludes, not includes. So
that's a very good point. There's an
yeah.
irony to it.
Definitely.
But do you think, because I've often wondered, some people say don't dumb down for your audience.
It's not a case of dumbing down, that's accessibility, surely.
Yeah, but I also wonder, is the word pedagogy exactly the same as the word learning? or does it mean more than learning? Because if it does, then you're saying more with one word, which is a more efficient way of communicating an idea to people. Because I've often thought about this, like when people say, why do you use such complex words? It's like, because there isn't actually an exact word that means the same thing that I'm trying to say right now. So I use a word.
Right, yes. And I think that's always the justification for doing it. And it doesn't matter what discipline you go into, whether it's, as you know, I play the guitar, and we have a whole load of jargon that's designed to keep the knowledge within. Ultimately, that's what the professional languages are for, and every single one has it. We both worked cynical in our youth on building sites, and we would have had the same thing.
But I'm less cynical generally when it comes to language, that's what it's for. I think there are certain people who use it in that way. Like a plumber comes around to your house and starts talking about some job, or whatever, electrician, and you just like, I don't know, just take my money. So in that way, it's used in that context. But I think actually coming up with new words that define a complex set of ideas in one single word is an important way for language to develop.
Well, you've intrigued me straight away, because my first job from school was as a plumber. So, and of course,
did you do that to your unwitting customers?
Not as far as I know,
Victims?
but I could do. You could start talking about the tools of the trade, like PTFE tape and things like that, and perhaps the British standards BS 54321 deliberately, instead of explaining what it is, just use the. And that is also a shorthand, so you've got the two competing sides. So yes, and I think that's probably why I've not changed the title yet, because I've not fully considered it. And you're right, there could be some reason why pedagogy is more important to have that there, because pedagogy is the teaching of the study of teaching and learning, rather than the one-sided consideration of learning. But then learning gives the right inference for what. Because pedagogy is more specific to teaching, because the question is all about, and the research lens looking through is about the student, is about the learning, not about the teacher. I mean, it doesn't. That's not to say it doesn't consider the teacher. It doesn't problematize the teacher, because it is interesting that there's a lot of literature that, well, not a lot. There's a research project I've been reading recently that did a review of the literature around entrepreneurship. And very similar to the way that I'm going to enter this piece of research, they looked at government policy, they looked at university policy, and they looked at all the documentation around that, how entrepreneurship was being brought in as a concept for courses outside of the business school. And that's very much a government thing, and very much something that's current in pedagogy, in teaching and learning at the moment. But what they noticed is that at no point did anybody mention the tutor or the teacher or the lecturer, and that had not been that their role had not been considered as part of that route, and yet the individual way of presenting entrepreneurship can be very different, and even if it's nuanced, it still makes a big difference. So I can't remember my point now, but I mean that is something that I've considered, because there are staff interviews, but that's more. Yes, so that was my point. My point was that I'm looking at more at the students' understanding of what the roles and positions are in the television studio. So the staff function within my research as being the people that initially frame up what those roles are and how they work. And so therefore I need to interview the staff to understand what their framing of the different studio roles are. But actually the interest is how the students then interpret that in coordination with their other understandings of what. So the methods I'm using, the methodological approach, is more complex than some, which is not a good thing. I mean, sometimes we say, oh, it's complicated because we're looking for that to be an important element of it, but in this case, actually, I don't think that's a simple set of methods for a doctoral piece of work is a good thing. I've overcomplicated it, but hopefully it will end up being simple. Just very quickly, there's staff interview, to understand the nature of how they present the roles to the students. Then there is a student questionnaire, which functions from several levels, because it's trying to find out, what the students think of roles, but it's also trying to find out their own social backgrounds. It's trying to look at their own position on within their own diversity, using the protected characteristics in the Equality Act 2010 as a template to understand that. And that is to map the field, the questionnaire. So the first one is about the staff, how the staff present the roles. The second bit of the questionnaire is to understand the relationships of people within the field of university television studio learning, as in the students. The third part is to record the students in the space, picking their roles through a number of sessions. And this is being done with a 360-degree camera. So, and we'll also record with the 360-degree camera one of the rehearsals. That's not data for the research project. The data comes from a selection of students re-experiencing those two filming points, and being able to see how they functioned within that space, and being critically reflected upon their own feelings and understandings. I piloted that part of the. I piloted all the parts of the method, and that was quite effective, because as soon as I put somebody in that virtual reality space, and this is actually just clicking on a camera in YouTube, so they weren't even wearing a headset, they were just able to direct their gaze wherever they wanted to look. But as soon as they were able to do it, they interacted with re-experiencing that space and that sort of experiences, and were critical immediately.
So it helped to sort of nudge their memory and their own experience of that space.
It actually comes from in it. The method comes from it comes from various places, but a colleague of mine is using a method for her research, Annie East, and she named this method virtual reality elicitation. And that's exactly what VR elicitation, that's exactly what it does. You re-experience the space, and then it elicits some responses from you. Right. And why that's powerful is because if you just ask questions about what happened, 2 days ago or an hour ago or whatever it was, the way that we then write that story, we author a new story dependent on our experience.
It'd be interesting if you could do both, but of course doing one would then it'd be too late. They would then feed what they did with one into the other.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to see the difference.
There's many ways in which you can test that, but that's not the point of the research here. It's just a way of allowing people to talk about their experiences, and which would give the data will be their responses in that situation. It will be semi-structured. There will be some questions. I will view the videos first and be able to ask some questions that will get some guide some responses to an extent. So that's the next part. And then the final part is a longitudinal element where re-interview some of them in their second year to see. Because one of the core principles of the way that Pierre Bourdieu looked at education is that he noticed, and I think probably he was the originator of this idea, that in fact education doesn't exclude overtly the way that you would assume, people being expelled, and of course it happens, but that's actually rare, especially when we're talking about higher education. The mechanism that usually prevents somebody being included is self-exclusion, either because of attendance or non-engagement when in the space, or picking to do something else, opting out. So it's the self-exclusion. So Bourdieu sort of came up with this concept of the fish out of water, the fish in water. So it's whether you feel like a fish in water or a fish out of water. Okay. And the intention, the point being that in the television studio, we'd like all our students to feel like fish in water.
Nice. That was a nice little roundup there. What if I said surely self-exclusion is everybody's right?
No, absolutely.
To self-exclude from something if they don't want to be included.
No, absolutely. The intention of the research is to understand student experiences in the television studio looking through the lens of inclusion. So understanding why some students do self-exclude is to inform the pedagogy, is going forwards to look at the dynamics and the positions available within the space and see how we present them, another reason for interviewing the staff. And look at whether there are other forms of pedagogy that can make people feel more included in the space.
I've often tussled with this a little bit with my own stuff that I do, like camera workshops, because as you know, it's a very kind of heavily male-dominated job. It's probably improved
professionally.
Now, professionally speaking, yeah.
It is improving, and a lot of that's because of the work done here. I mean, there's a lot of our graduates.
But I always question. It's like I always sort of questioned. You try your best to kind of even that out, I guess. But then you're thinking to yourself, well, perhaps it's just some sort of inherent. Well, you can't. Each individual person, you can't make them do something that they feel they don't want to do for whatever reason. If they feel like they don't want to do it,
no.
But I guess maybe the idea is to remove as many boundaries as possible, so they have the option to do it if they wish to.
I think it's like everything in life. It's not. Was it Socrates who said something along the lines of, I'm doing well, quoting Greek philosophers. Socrates said something, he talked about the unexamined life is not worth living, something like that. So it's not, I'm not trying to fix the world. The intention of the research is purely to engage with what the possible reasons for self-exclusion from the space are, to try and long-term look at ensuring there is an inclusive pedagogic space there. There is frameworks for inclusive pedagogy in general, but specifically, I want to look at the television studio. For instance, at the moment, we allow the students to pick their own roles in the studio space, and maybe that's not the way to do it. Maybe a guided exercise would be better, maybe something specific. But who knows? What I'm saying is we've not engaged critically with what we do there, other than the individual lecturers and tutors using their own experience to dictate that. And it's just, I think doctoral study is a point at which that you can have very, very deep inquiry into something very, very specific. And in this case, I think that warrants investigation.
What are these protected characteristics that you mentioned earlier?
Right. Yes, this is from the 2010 Equality Act, and it's an interesting act. In many ways, it was a massive step forwards, because before 2010, there was protection under law for all sorts of diversity, but under separate legislation, and sometimes multiple pieces of legislation. They reckon that the Equality Act replaced over 100 different sets of legislation. So whether it was age or gender or whatever, I mean, and those are the protected. So the first thing that the Equality Act does is define protected characteristics, the characteristics that are protected under the Act, which in some ways is counterproductive, in that that puts very firm lines in the sand as what is protected under equality legislation. And also there was a part of that law that was designed to protect intersectionality. That's when you answer more than one of the protected characteristics where you feel that you may be prejudiced against because of two elements. And that unfortunately was never enacted. So at the moment you can only pursue a case under one protected characteristics, and the protected characteristics, just as I said there, their age, religion, class, race, not class, sorry, just added one. Class is not in there. Sexual orientation, sexual identity.
Yet. Have you said gender?
Gender, yeah. I don't know how many I did, but yes. So there's 7.
Is race and nationality two different things? Are they on there, or?
They are two different things. I think they are two different. Yeah, I'd have to look them up. Sorry. Yeah. But yes, there are 7 different protected characteristics. Right. And it's just, I think the research is actually going to use that as a framework, because you need to have some form of framework to apply. But I don't think the research is going to inquire into all 7. I think it's actually going to end up inquiring into 3 or 4 of those elements. And I think the interesting thing with, I mean, as I say, the research required a framework, and that seemed to be as the prevailing law in the country at the time, that seems to be a reasonable thing to use. But I think the interesting thing about inclusion is that it can in fact include everyone. Already in the academic literature, the Equality Act it's suggested that anyone can pursue cases under it, because we all have age. We all have a gender identity. So there are certain characteristics. Disabilities under there as well, actually.
Of course, yeah. The age one for me is an interesting one, because we are literally our age is literally changing.
It
every
is,
second.
and you can suffer prejudice for your age for being too young or being too old. So it's multidimensional.
But also, I think part of your study, I don't know if you're still doing this, but the neurodiversity stuff, is that still part of the study?
Yeah, I mean that was an entry point for me, and I realised that actually there's far more to look at. It's when you looking at research, or certainly with the doctoral study, my supervisors gave me quite a definitive sort of decision to make post major review, and I came out the other side of major review. I was looking at exactly as you say, neurodiversity in the television studio, and they said, "Well, which is it?" I was like, "What do you mean?" And well, you need to be focused. Are you looking at the television studio? Is that your subject, or is neurodiversity your subject? Because if it's neurodiversity, you can look at it in workshops and seminars. You can look at it in multiple different contexts. Why specifically the studio if it's neurodiversity? If you're looking at the studio, then why specifically neurodiversity? Why are you not looking at inclusion more generally?
Right.
Was one side of the sort of questions, which I think it makes perfect sense.
It sounds a bit it sounds a little bit. But I mean, on the one hand, they're telling you to focus, and on the other hand, they're telling you, like they're saying, if you're looking at the TV studio, then why just neurodiversity? As in, they're asking you to broaden out the other part of it.
Well, no, because what they're saying is that you can make it about neurodiversity and then use the television studio as your case study, but the subject would be neurodiversity.
Right, I see.
So the eventual, the question they asked me that set me down the path I'm on now was when they said, or not the question, it was when they framed it this way. One of my supervisors said, of course, if you were to think of the studio as your focus, there's two of your colleagues that are also involved in doctoral study on education doctorates to do with studio teaching, and you can develop a community of practice around that and a community of research around that. So that's
like a ding, ding, ding.
It was. It was.
Community of practice.
Well, it was because you support each other. Your research feeds into each other. You can cite each other. And yes, these microphones slowly.
Yeah, they're a bit. Let me just actually try to counterweight mine slightly. Sorry for if the audio is sounding a bit.
I'm guessing you're going to edit this bit out.
I might have to. Yeah.
Well, it's good you've got more than one camera, so you can.
I'll probably just mute the audio on mine.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, you can still hear you.
Yeah, I could really. I might invest in my own mic stands. But mind you, you've probably got some better ones in the TV studio, haven't you?
No, these are good for this type of thing.
No, but all the
the stands.
The bolts are
yes. Yeah, but microphones. These are the same sort of stands we use for music and. Being in a band and setting them up and watching them slowly, over the years, you get used to just how tightly you need to do them up. Anyway, no, so where do we get to? So that's why the decision about making the focus the television studio and then widening the other side of it to inclusion. It doesn't mean to say that in the data analysis and the final conclusions that it cannot zone in on a specific area of inclusion, so it may well refocus.
Of conclusion, did you say, or inclusion?
Yeah, well, exactly.
But I think
so
you were thinking
we started
when you conclude, you might find that one of those protected characteristics is somehow being
the research
less
just
included than others, or something like that.
It could be that, but all the research could just be informed better, or the research can be informed by one specific. I don't know. We'll have to see. Who knows what? I mean, that's the whole point about entering research like this. You actually don't know the answer. Otherwise, why would you be doing it in the first place? You can have some sort of guesses as to what's going to happen and some intuition about what's going to happen. But I genuinely don't know what's going to come out the other side of this. What sort of recommendations could be made, and what the students' individual experiences on a granular level, through this VR elicitation, that's going to be quite, what those are going to come out as. And certainly in a pilot, there was surprising how people related their experiences in the space. It's obviously you're not, until you do something like this, you are not inside other people's heads. Not that this research gets inside people's heads, actually.
Not like your voice in my headphones.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of like a bit of a summary of your research.
Yeah.
What led you to this point? Out of all the things you could do in life, what led you to be doing a doctorate?
Right. Well, actually,
and
that
this
ties,
particular topic as well.
That ties back into, and you've asked it anyway, but it ties back into the research, I think. I mean, and this is where I was going just now as well with the inclusion thing. I've used the framework from the legislation, but there's multiple problems with it, intersectionality being one. But the other one being that, in actual fact, all of us present a wide profile of different facets that could be prejudiced against for lots of different reasons.
Including those that aren't as visible, I was thinking as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Neurodiversity is actually a key one of those. But and the reason, because people cite numerous barriers and obstacles to success in life. And really, if you're looking for a perfect inclusive space, then anyone should be able to work within that space. And to give you an example, how wide and how broad that becomes, there is a prince of the realm who well, is he still a prince of the realm? I'm not sure, but who has considerable sort of concerns about his treatment over the last few years. And so when you're at that end of society where they seem to have had every privilege...
Oh, you're talking about Harry?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out who the
Maybe I should have just spoken out loud. But yeah, I mean, Prince Harry clearly feels very strongly that there have been barriers to happiness in his life and fulfillment in his life. So what I'm saying is that... and that's not to devalue other people's experiences and not to say that there is different value in different experiences. But Harry makes a compelling case... that not everyone agrees with, but still makes a compelling case that...
And what you're saying is if someone that to everybody else seems like he has almost the perfect life, all these riches, the luxury to go wherever he wants in life, still has grievances over how he's been treated... I don't know how we're going to finish that point. What were you going to say?
Well, no, because I mean, you're sort of making my point for me, but which is fine.
That basically everyone has some form of barrier to something that they want that they can't get.
Yeah, and I was going to give myself as the example because that points to why I feel motivated to get a doctorate.
I think people say, isn't it? We're all victims.
Well, you can look through that lens, but I think most of us choose not to. Well, Prince Harry obviously not. But
well, I mean, I think from time to time we probably all do.
We're going off the point, Tom. Anyway.
No, I don't think we are.
My point was that...
Are you a victim?
You don't know what my point was.
I don't care about
my point was is that, no, in some ways I do see myself as a victim there because I found... that I wasn't a fish in water in broadcasting, and I struggled to gain a foothold and to develop a career in broadcasting, and moved around a lot because of that, generally in smaller TV stations. I had one of the better qualifications in broadcast journalism in the country, should have had every opportunity open. And I saw some of my colleagues on that qualification doing very well, especially within the BBC. And it's at that point I realised that traditionally broadcasting has had a real class divide, which is well cited and well...
So I could counter this, couldn't I, by saying, but you seem to be a white male who speaks very well, who's quite tall, which is also a good thing to be what is the what's the barrier here?
And so this is where Pierre Bourdieu comes in, and this is why so many people... in my situation, read Bourdieu for the first time and suddenly go, oh, he understands me. It clicks. And you hear these stories time and time again. Most people I'm sorry, I should mute this.
That is unprofessional.
It is incredibly unprofessional. And there's 3 times I let it do it before I've muted it. There we go. It's an often told story that when you read Bourdieu for the first time, suddenly going, and I present, and perhaps to a certain extent I've deliberately cultivated that as well, an impression of being somebody that would glide through, but I didn't feel that way because I came from a very rural hamlet in Somerset, as I will say it with my Z's. Now I'm talking about home. And I went to a comprehensive in an area that has the lowest social mobility in the country. And I only found that out recently, actually. I'd never seen it. I'd always thought that growing up in that area was a huge privilege and not realised what a barrier to social mobility growing up in a very insular seaside town can be. Now, I mean, I'm not claiming that I have the same barriers I had the same barriers as other people had to. I mean, I very much know that I had privilege in multiple situations, and exploited privilege in multiple situations, and probably would not do it any differently in the future. But that's not to say that I agree with that being the way that the world is. And that's why, in a very small way, this doctoral research hopes to open an area of huge privilege of working in the television studios that we have here are very, very nice, top of the range, 4K, probably the best in the country in an education establishment at the moment. Taught by some very, very important people who've had glittering broadcast careers, and me. But yeah, so I mean, it's a huge privilege to be here as well. And I think one of the things about being able to reflect on privilege, and I know a lot of people have balked at this concept and idea of privilege, but one of the things about being able to reflect upon it is you can take two decisions. You can either balk at it, you can have problems with it, and you can critique it, or you can actually say, no, I get that. I have had a huge amount of privilege in multiple ways, but possibly not in this way, which I can use empathically to think about how that would function for other people who have less privilege. And why can I not therefore use my privilege, or the situation that I find myself in due to that privilege, to make the world a better place in the future?
It's interesting, isn't it, this idea of check your privilege, or check your privileges comes across as a negative connotation, doesn't it? It's when people say shut up, basically, aren't they? Like, people get put down online if they say check your privileges.
Right. Yeah.
But I wasn't trying to go down that route. Anyway.
And sometimes that's a very relevant thing to be saying, I think.
Well, I mean, I suppose people could level that criticism at Prince Harry, right?
And you were saying I was unprofessional.
So, oh shit, yeah, that's a reminder I need to do something.
And you've sworn
I've
on
just
next
snoozed
to
it.
And you've sworn on a microphone. Brilliant. Full house.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I just need to amend the time on this so I do remember to do this, because otherwise I'll be in trouble. I need to drop the pushchair that I inadvertently brought to work this morning in the boot of my car.
Actually,
back home.
No, that is a wonderful example. I used to I worked for a short time as a videographer with my own business, and went out, and it was mainly viral video, and worked for some very large clients. And there was one particular client who I would have said should have known better. Now, one of the reasons that I worked like that was because I was a stay-at-home dad, and so I was primary carer during the day because my wife was working. For my daughter, and occasionally I would have to take her on filming jobs. And the vast majority of people actually saw it as an advantage to have Chloe along to these sort of things. I mean, but there was one particular client I had who loomed over the top of her, and she burst into tears, and then had a real problem. That I was a working father that had to, and because it was not deliberate, it was organised that she would be looked after. It was a long story, and it was organised by his press officer, and she was unable. That was unable to happen, and I lost that very important work. It was a public service employer as well, so an individual having an issue that way. So what I'm trying to say is, I suddenly understood what a challenge being a mother and working must be from that parallel experience.
I've got a very good friend of mine who's going through this battle at the moment, who's recently had a child, and she works in a zoo in Devon, and they refuse. I
know the zoo.
Do you?
Very well. Yeah.
Why? How?
If it is the same one,
probably not. No, it's a small zoo.
Yeah. It was the subject of film. I Bought a Zoo.
Is it? Well, this seems like a strange coincidence.
Dartmoor.
No, it's not that one.
Oh, okay, right. Yeah, that would be a coincidence. Anyway, yeah.
I think it's Sheldon. Right. Is that a place in Devon?
Don't know. Carry on. I can't remember the name of the zoo I'm trying to talk about now.
Anyway, she's battling at the moment because they refuse to consider different hours for her to be flexible and this sort of stuff. Fair. And she's now getting involved with protests for, like, what are they? The slogan is pregnant then screwed. Or something like that, which I think is quite catchy.
Yeah, it's quite catchy.
Because you basically do get penalised as soon as you have children in certain industries, I would imagine.
The Equality Act covers pregnancy and maternity, but I think it's quite limited protection. But there is some protection in law for
It's an interesting
mothers.
Thing for me. I mean, I completely like side with that side of things from the individual human perspective, but then part of me also thinks, well, a business is I mean, to what extent and how can we encourage businesses to cater for individuals in that sense, when really the prime focus of a business is to capitalize, is to make profit.
In a neoliberal society.
Yeah. So I mean, but how does that
take a change of government to change that? Anyway,
how do we? How is that? I know we're going off topic, but
well, no, but so there are some interesting elements here, because obviously as part of the literature review for this work, I had to read through an awful lot of government policy and the Equality Act multiple times.
So dull.
Yeah, I won't deny it. But actually, no. One of the interesting things, and this is when you have to say something's interesting, you sometimes wonder if I have to qualify it as being interesting. Is it really? But no. In this case, I think it probably is that...
you said it again, that means it's terribly disinteresting.
Well, looking at it from a student's perspective and looking at... so the reason to use law is if you feel that you've been unfairly treated. So you'd use the Equality Act. You would basically, you go and see a barrister, not a lawyer, that's America. In this country, it'd be a solicitor. You go and see a solicitor and say that I've been unfairly treated because of A, B and C. And they would say... well, you would have a case under the Equality Act because that's one of the protected characteristics, and then justify that piece of statutory legislation. But it doesn't mean to say it's the only piece of legislation that may fit. Quite often you'll hear about a new law being brought in and you think, well, why is there a new law in that? Because it's already covered by another piece of legislation. For instance, when you're filming on a beach, somebody say you're not allowed to film here. Well, no, you are, because you're in a public space. But you may be filming children inappropriately, in which case, no, there's other legislation that prevents you from doing that. So it's always a patchwork. And the really see, I've said really interesting now. I'm absolutely condemning this tidbit.
It's in your head now.
Yeah, but so when it comes to students that feel that they've been unfairly treated by, say, a university, you would think, oh well, the equality legislation is going to be your primary friend, but there's quite a lot to prove under the Equality Act. And as we were saying earlier, intersectionality may mean that you have to pursue it under one element, whereas the two taken together is what's caused the prejudice. So you're unlikely to be successful because they say, well, that's actually not reached them. There's a set of sort of measures to allow a judge or a jury to make a decision under that. So what they're actually suggesting now is that students wouldn't bother with the Equality Act because of the way that education is now funded. And I don't think this has been tried in law yet, and this is a specific paper, Roberts and Howe, if you're interested in following up.
Wow, I'm impressed.
Yeah, and they what they suddenly realised is that actually a student that wants to progress a case under prejudice would have a sense of recourse through the consumer legislation because they're paying for their education. And that's far more powerful, and the potential awards are quite high. Exactly, and that's the point. So you've just shown your legal knowledge. I see you looking very proud of yourself. Precedent. Yeah, actually it does, and you're exactly right, because it takes one case to be won to set that as a legal precedent, and then it becomes very straightforward for people to prosecute underneath that piece of legislation. So yeah, consumer law is, and I know the universities are concerned about that because there is training being given around consumer law, and that's a facet. That's a way in which education is developing. So actually, another rationale for my research, because if we were, for instance, to be found not to be inclusive in the television studio, obviously a student would be able to pursue us for damages under the Equality Act 2010, or in fact consumer law.
That could be a very useful rationale for you in terms of,
why I'm doing it.
No, not for you personally, but like external traction or whatever.
Yeah,
it's of big interest to universities who might come up against this sort of thing.
Yeah,
that's actually, it could be a good rationale for, I don't know, stakeholders in your research or whatever, people who are interested in funding something along the lines of.
It is important to think about these things in these ways because, for instance, universities feel that they're doing inclusion very, very well. I think we feel in this university we're doing inclusion well, but certainly Sarah Armott, who is well published on this subject, wrote a book called can't remember the name of the book.
That's,
that's
an interesting title.
Yeah, 2012 on being included. It's called. There we are. I knew it was in there somewhere.
Well played.
On being included, and she looked at diversity work in universities. Because she was concerned that it wasn't doing what it said on the tin. And her conclusions are really quite surprising, but also when you hear them you go, oh yeah. Because what she pointed out is inclusion work within large organisations, and she focused on universities, but she levels this accusation wider, generally is about writing policies and counting representation. And her question through the book is what does this actually do to change inclusion, to change diversity? And, well, it doesn't really do that at all, because diversity work in and of itself is not involved in increasing diversity. It's involved in counting and publishing policy.
I think you had another finger up for a second then.
No.
I'm so used to doing that. You doing that to me.
I find it helps people remember stuff, but there's also places where it's not appropriate. But yeah, no. And that's an intriguing sort of thing to think that actually this idea has been co-opted within a neoliberal framework to ultimately not achieve what it's there to achieve.
Well, I mean, what does inclusion look like, really? The perfect inclusive thing. What does it look like?
And there's huge debate over that. Is it? To bring someone up that you've cited on occasion, whose name I've forgotten.
Who I've cited?
Yeah,
I don't ever cite anyone. Oh, Peterson.
Thank you,
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson. He's I'm not a fan, but you also know some of my arguments as to he presents very sensible arguments, but he is specifically designed to aggrandize himself. He will look at any debate and look for the chinks in the armour and develop a compelling argument. And the one that he puts onto equality is he sees the current framework for equality to be equality of outcome, which I think he's probably right about.
Because of that counting thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Quantifying things. I mean, this is the thing that are probably already there. I don't know. It's hard to say.
But I think this is where I think Peterson's dangerous, because he has a point, which is equality of outcome is not the same as equality for opportunity. And actually, if you look at it purely using an intellectual framework, equality of opportunity is the right way to go, and equality of outcome is clearly wrong. But that completely ignores the fact that we are working within a very highly skewed society. Our own department is a good example of this. When I joined our department, it was 80% male, 20% female tuition. Now, that is not going to be positive for inclusion. The representation on the teaching staff is 80% male. That says two things. It says to any female any female student that comes in, I'm not represented. I can't see myself doing any of these jobs, basically. And secondly, what it does is it means that we're only getting a singular perspective from male staff, and suggests that it is a male industry. And we're now, within like 2 or 3 years, it was there was a policy of encouragement for female staff. Female staff were strongly encouraged to apply, stating that there was and in this case, equality of opportunity. But we within a very short number of years went to a 50-50 concentration of staff, which are the numbers that we put forward to Athena Swan. So I know that they're valid. And the department's not fallen off a cliff. It's not exploded. Nothing's gone wrong. We've used arguably a positive discrimination policy to change the distribution within the department, which is where the problems come.
Yeah, because I don't think there's such thing as positive discrimination without the negative of some individual has probably been penalised for not being the correct
absolutely,
gender
and some individual has, and I think we know where I would go with that. But that's not the point. The point is that we've addressed a historic problem
of this representation idea is what the thing is, because it's fixed something by breaking lots of other small things along the way. Probably.
I think there's a point at which positive discrimination and equality of outcome
is justified.
Is justified, and there's a point at which it's not justified.
I kind of understand that argument that like you do this stuff for maybe like 10 years to try to correct the issue and then let it go again or something. But will that let it go again thing?
If you're
what will the outcome of that be?
If a nail goes into your tyre on your car,
right? I don't know where this is going, but go on.
You repair it, don't you?
Sure, yeah.
You don't then replace that tyre next week,
and
the week after, and the week after that.
I'm trying to figure out how I can argue with this.
If you've got a problem with it, well, no. If you've got a problem, if something breaks on your car, you get it repaired. You don't then keep repairing it. You just repair it once.
Oh, I see.
But you do put the effort into fixing that problem.
Yeah, okay, but let's say your tyres wear out over time, so you have to constantly keep repairing those because the natural way of things just leads to a certain thing.
You can't ignore it.
There's no... Okay.
But you've just fitted a new set of tyres, then you could ignore it.
For a while.
Yeah.
Until it happens again.
Maybe at some point somebody will and there's been many different attempts at this. There will be a tyre invented that's not an air-based pneumatic tyre.
I thought you were going to move this over to the actual thing we're talking about when you started.
No, I'm still with the analogy.
Sticking with the
analogy.
analogy.
But somebody will actually fix the principle of pneumatic tyres, and we'll no longer have punctures.
So in the analogy, what does that mean?
Well, maybe our society will become...
We'll learn our own biases.
Yes, and we will become a more equitable society, at which point it doesn't need repairing, is my point. My point is positive discrimination is there to repair historic wrongs. It's like when people say, why is there still a problem with racism in America? They're still going on about history. Well, no, this is recent. This is now. This is still a problem. There's a problem that needs to be fixed. Can't leave it alone. It needs to be repaired. So there needs to be reparation. There needs to be consideration. There needs to be talk. It needs to be brought up at every opportunity to fix the problem. If the problem's fixed, then we don't have to mention it. But the only people who think the problem is fixed are the people that don't have the problem.
The people who benefit from the problem.
Exactly. Well, in fact, yes. I say the people who have the problem, it's even worse than that. It's people who benefit from the problem.
Something I've not thought about before.
I mean, a garage will repair your tyres every week if you give them 50 quid. Of course.
But that's because it's not their problem.
It's not their problem. They'll take the money. They'll check your tyres for you. They'll rotate them. They'll replace them. They'll do whatever you want.
Something that occurred to me when we were talking about the equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity debate, which hadn't occurred to me before, but it's just occurred to me when we're talking now, is how do you define at what point in forcing some sort of equality thing, how can you define? How can you define? No. What I'm saying,
and it's right.
No. Let me finish. What I'm saying is, how can you define the difference between an outcome and giving someone an opportunity? Because we could argue, okay, hiring lots of females in the department was an outcome, but was it? Was it actually an opportunity to then develop somehow other? Like you could take it all the way back down to being a child and being picked, say for the school team or something.
Well, thank
you. Are
you
giving that child an outcome, or are you giving them an opportunity?
I thank you for undermining Peterson's argument for me. But you're absolutely right. In this particular analogy, no actual positive discrimination, to my knowledge, was displayed. It was the advert that purely said applications particularly welcome from female. Now, I don't know if there was any discrimination through the employment process, but I don't believe there was. I believe that everybody interviewed equally.
It's hard to prove one way or another, isn't it? But
I do know the number of female applicants went up.
Which
then meant that the number of successful female candidates went up. I mean, those two things are linked. So,
if I was a man reading that advert, I'd probably be less inclined to apply for it. If it said females, I would think, why have they written that? That discludes me. That feels like
excludes me.
I said discludes.
You said discludes.
That's a new word.
The idea of a white middle-class male being excluded from anything.
But this is the point we're making, though, isn't it? This is the point we're making, and this is the point I said. This is why I brought up that you're a white male, blah blah blah. But you've got your own barriers that you felt. I mean, if something explicitly said, females are welcome, I would think. On the flip side, then they didn't include my protected characteristic in there. males are also included.
Right.
So that
I
must
didn't
mean
know you were
I'm
going that way.
excluded. That must mean I'm excluded
I
if
would
they
just-
didn't include me in the
You're
list.
right,
That they.
and I would still justify that as saying that there is a point at which you have to repair a problem.
Yeah,
Peterson's
I don't
point
disagree with that.
actually even goes deeper than that, because if he was sat here now, obviously I would lose hands down. The guy is very bright and is
But it
is
bugs me that
very
because
used
that's sorry.
to
That's another
debate.
point.
So
I
I'm
was
winning
thinking-
because he's not here.
But that's another point. That's another thing that annoys me is that sometimes when people debate, they're debating for their own ego. They see it as a
Well,
win
he
for
is.
them, an individual win for them.
He is.
And they're not trying to find a truth in the matter, which it bugs me then if someone says, I'm really good at debating. It's like, well,
I'm
great. Are you
trying-
finding truth ever? Or are you just winning the debates that you go to get
Well,
into?
exactly. I'm trying to be equal-handed by suggesting what his counterpoints would be. His
Yeah.
counterpoint in this
But
case, I think, would
I
be.
think we actually do that quite well when we chat with each other. So
I hope so,
I think
but
we do
probably
consider
not.
both sides of the argument. No, I think we sometimes
Try
clash,
to.
but then we consider.
Well, I think his answer would be that that's all fair enough, but who decides when you stop doing the positive discrimination?
Well, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and that becomes the problematic area. And also, actually, his main argument I do disagree with, which is that there is specific measurable differences between what a man and what a woman can achieve and how they approach things. And he's been on record as saying that.
Are you talking like biological differences here now, or
Yeah, but he, I think, overstresses the extent to which those biological differences affect people in the professional world.
okay?
I mean, there are specific obvious
the,
ones.
The thing he gives is this bell curve thing. I don't know if you've.
Yeah, probably. But there's
where he
nothing-
says
I'm sure
like
can-
say the top 10% of people who are interested in engineering are the people who actually become engineers.
Hmm.
And although there's a fairly even split across the middle, the top 10% is mostly males. For example,
But
that's like one of the examples
I
he
really
gives.
don't feel that engineering is something that is going to be an innately biological gender imbalance, because it's a neurological thing. It's not physically.
But how does the how? I mean, I don't. This is the constant debate that actually ended up me getting frustrated when I was doing my own doctorate, was because it's this nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah,
like
well,
how
you
much
can't
of this
answer.
does it affect your psychology towards things? Like I think most people. Well, actually, let me just ask you: would you agree that women biologically across a percentage of the population are more nurturing, have more instinct towards nurture? Because if you could admit that, then by extension, there then becomes a whole load of differences that men and
Right.
women have. But it depends if you can, if
There,
you would agree with that.
there is an element of nurture and an element of nature. I think we massively, I mean, by thousands of percent points, which is impossible, but by a huge percentage, we massively overstate
Percentages. Carry on.
the nurture side.
Right, okay.
And the reason that I say this is that my father's generation, I mean, actually, and he reminded me of this, and because I was telling him how lucky I was to be able to be a stay-at-home dad and he was like, "You've got a short memory." I was like, "What?" And he'd, in his time, obviously, it was much tougher for somebody to be a stay-at-home dad, and he worked it through a little loophole in that he took night shifts so he could be at home during the day, and he would sleep in the mornings and then be up in the afternoons to see his family, his young family, which I was really shocked, surprised, and impressed when he said that. But what I'm saying is, in his time, it was pretty much an absolute. When we were kids in the 70s, I'm that old, yeah, thank you. The man went to work and the woman stayed at home.
Yes,
Probably even in your childhood, even though you're only 12, you probably. There's still a strong influence, but that goes down each year as we realise how ridiculous that is. There is a point to it.
So do you think? So sometimes I feel a little bit like I don't have as good instincts when it comes to small things, looking after kids as my wife Claire does. But I wonder, is that because it's been culturally ingrained on me because I identify as a
There's
man
an
and
element
then
of
as that
both,
masculine thing,
but I
or
would
is it
say
just because
the biological element has been massively overstated and the nurture element's been almost completely forgotten. Like, for instance, the pink and blue thing.
I mean, it is quite a big deal, though, that a woman carries the baby for 9 months and then, more often than not, feeds the baby from her own breast. I mean, that natural thing that we cannot change is probably the foundation for a lot of other things that then make men and women different. That's an unchangeable.
Yeah, no.
Mind it is changeable with science these days, to be honest, but
less more changeable, but it's still not entirely changeable.
Yeah.
Yes, I still go back to my point. I think it's massively overstated.
Okay.
I think you're right that there is underneath everything that humankind does, there are biological imperatives. We are biological creatures, but we have overprinted that with civilization, society, and our own cognitive ability to think for thousands of years. So it obscures almost totally the biological imperatives to our lives, but not completely, no. But understanding what the balance is impossible. There's an unanswerable question.
Yeah.
And why do we need to answer it? We don't need to answer it. I mean, there's evidence all around us that we've got it wrong at the moment. And I'll go back to my example. 80% male, 20% female, now 50% male-female, still works.
I don't think anyone ever
The
doubted
department's
it would.
not changed
I don't
in
think
any
anyone
way.
ever doubted it would. I wouldn't imagine anyone ever
Well,
doubted the
do you know what?
50-50 wouldn't work.
I expect there were some people that thought that, and I think I would have myself a couple of decades ago. I remember entering the broadcast industry and having those feelings about, well, why do the girls want to do camera now? They're not strong enough, and leave it. I'm a bloke. I should be allowed to do it. I remember being in radio and thinking I don't have an accent, and being very proud of the fact that, I mean, that was given to me by my parents. It was not something that I worked hard to get or anything, but I was very proud of not having an accent because it meant I could be a broadcaster. And then all of a sudden they want regional accents. I felt very hard done by that. Yeah, it's all a bit silly, to be honest. And all we need to do is just look after each other and make sure that everybody has the opportunity. Equality of opportunity is really what I'm talking about as far as the studio is concerned.
Yeah, but when does the opportunity become an outcome?
It's concerned.
That's my question.
Well, yeah, and I would encourage equality of outcome at the moment. I had a student who was neurodiverse and still doesn't have, years after graduation, still's not got an industry job, and I very much encouraged that to happen, but unfortunately it has not. But, you know, there are a number of our graduates now who are camera operators who are not what you traditionally consider to be a cameraman.
Nice inference on the man there.
Well,
cameraman.
yeah, and I think we could be justifiably proud of a few things that we've done, very small things, but still considerable things. Our old head of department, as you know, lobbied the Guild of Television Cameramen to change their title because it's possibly the last example in the modern world. I mean, postman, maybe we still use. I don't know.
Well, they would call it a delivery merchant or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Delivery operant.
So it's one of the last ones, because I remember working at the police 10 years ago, more longer than that, 15 years ago, occasionally slipped into policeman, and I was always immediately corrected police officer. It is police officer. These are genderless roles.
They've now changed it to camera professionals, haven't they? The Guild of Television.
So yeah, the Guild, actually, we misinterpreted because initially they were very resistant to it, and we interpreted that as being negative towards the idea, but it went to the membership and it was changed to Guild of Television Professionals. They were actually concerned with I think one of the leading sort of suggestions was camera operator, and that negates the sort of craft of camera work, or they felt it did, and made it sound. But you know, having been a camera operator and being a video journalist and running cameras, and you teach cameras as well, the level of science that's sometimes applied to it by some of the old boys in the industry is unjustifiable. It is a creative and technical job.
I mean,
that
there
takes
is
some skill and aptitude.
Yeah,
and
there is
work.
a certain amount to get your head around to begin with, but once you're over that, it's not.
Yeah,
rocket science.
and I guess that's the same with pretty much all disciplines, to be fair.
Yeah.
But we make these delineations, we say these things, and we want to be professionals rather than operators purely because we want to protect our own interests, and that's understandable, you know. And the only way to actually get us to sit down and go, no, I want to change that bit of practice, is for some decent, peer-reviewed, quality research to be done that, bringing it
And here he is.
bringing it full cycle. So the reason for doing this piece of research, is just to ensure that this wonderful facility, that certainly is something that is appreciated by everyone who sees it, is open to all, and is not something that is only open to a small percentage of society. Hopefully, the findings of the research are that we're actually doing this quite well. I don't, we shall have to see. It depends on the students, because it's really the students. I mean, it's research usually looks at either agency or structure. So the way I've been talking infers that I'm looking purely at the students. But as you, when I was going through the methods, I was talking about working out the positions available within the studio. So that's the structure. So using a Bourdieusian, as they call it, or Bourdieuian, or however you want to say it, lens to look through a theoretical lens, hopefully it can bring the structure and the agent together, so that the student in the space and the structure itself, we can look at how those two interact and see whether we are being inclusive, or to what extent we're being inclusive. Sorry, you can't be inclusive or not inclusive. It's always a spectrum. Well, it is.
Ironic use of the word spectrum as well, because that's...
Well, it's used in neurodiversity, yes. But
Anyway. I feel like this is concluding, so let's wrap this up. Adrian Butterworth, or maybe soon to be Dr. Adrian Butterworth.
No. Well, you asked me what the reasons for doing the research at the start, and actually, probably far too much
That's
around
the real
being called doctor, but yes.
Thank you for the chat. It's been enlightening.
Hopefully. Good. Well, in which case the research is already fulfilling its intentions.
No, it sounds like good research, and I'm glad that you've actually kind of finally settled on an idea, because I seem to remember... Oh, let's not get back into a conversation. But it's taken you a long time to get
engagement
to this point,
and impact. We're there. It's good.
Cheers.
Cheers.